believe I'm a professor for life, so I believe I can't lose it. But at the moment, I'm a little bit anxious that I might, because I can't go back to Russia at the moment. So,
Oh, well, yeah, that's unfortunate, actually. So
well, it may
how are
be
things?
fortunate, maybe, yeah.
How are things going with that? Do you have to teach online classes or?
No. They just seem to have sidelined me at the moment. But
Oh no.
that's fine. I was at a point where they wanted to move me from one. In Russia, they use the term chair, which theoretically we use here, but we have the chair of such and such. In Russia, the chair is your office.
Yes.
And the language just gets very confusing. But we use this term in English. Chair in Latin would be chair in Greek would be cathedra. So the great chairs of academic excellence are the cathedrals.
Yeah.
In Western society. So we have this concept, and they wanted to move me in Russia from the chair of teacher training, of pedagogy, and I never quite know how to say that word. I never know if it's got two hard G's or one soft G, one hard G, or the other way around.
Yeah.
Pedagogy. I think it's pedagogy. They wanted to move me from that, where well, I was quite happy to be, but they wanted to move me to be the first professor of theology in their university, which would have been quite nice in one sense, because it's my subject, but a bit frightening in another sense, because I would be a professor of theology in an Orthodox university and be expected to have an Orthodox bias, which I have anyway. But I think of my Orthodox bias as being slightly sort of eccentric, and there it would be, and in Russia it would be mainstream, and I would be working very hard to do what other Russians do naturally. And also I'm a bit of a rebel, so I like to mix things up, and I don't think the Russian Orthodox Church would be very happy with that. So I planned a conference, which then got interrupted by COVID, and it was a conference about multi-faith. And I was particularly keen to have a friend come to speak who is an atheist, ex-Orthodox Hasidic Jew. So he belonged to a very, very strange group that didn't speak English.
Yeah.
And so his first language was Yiddish, and he lived in Stamford Hill, and he rejected the group, and therefore he got exiled from his family. He had a really tough time, and he went to study in Bristol University, where he still is, and he's really happy, and he's now reconciled himself, at least with his mother. I don't know whether his father is talking to him at the moment, but he took a big decision, and part of the decision was he escaped secretly into the local library where he read English books and taught himself English. And I know the library. And I just think, what a brilliant fellow. He's studying philosophy and physics. And he's very enthusiastic, and so I thought it would be very nice to get him involved, but COVID has interrupted things, and I don't know really whether I've been moved to this new chair or not. So I'm also, I think the circle created slightly too much attention, and I think I need to keep a low profile for a while.
Yeah.
Or just move permanently into television land.
Well, yeah, you went on Channel 4's The Circle, and you came third, I think, and I actually watched that, and I thought it was quite
thank you.
It was quite a unique idea for a TV show. What kind of made you choose that?
I didn't choose it. So that is generally the first question somebody asks me. So you're very good to have delayed that for a few minutes and have kept me happy. So congratulations. No, I was telephoned out of the blue by one of the producers who asked me if I would be. It was a very, it's quite a groveling letter. And they said, would it be possible? Might you consider being part of this very exciting and very popular Channel 4 program, which is now getting onto its second series? And I thought, I have no idea what this is.
Yeah.
But I've got a month exactly when I'm free at that time.
That's brilliant.
And I had to do a conference in St. Petersburg at the end of that time. And I thought, well, even if I were to go on this program, they'll never keep me in for the whole period. So I can still get off to St. Petersburg and do my conference with Noam Chomsky, which I was looking forward to enormously. As it was, I couldn't do the conference.
Wow.
Because
it really fell into place, didn't it?
Well, yeah, in terms of, yeah, it fell into place. It happened very fast. I think it was a matter of 3 weeks or so before, 3 weeks from the telephone to the point at which the show began.
Wow.
So there was really very little time to think. And in that time, I watched the first season and I thought, well, it's relatively safe. But I knew nothing about reality TV at all. I now know so much more.
Yeah.
I think it's a part of television as an industry that needs to be radically reformed and regulated, because too many people coming out of these shows who are miserable at best, and at worst, who kill themselves.
Yeah.
And adjusting to life after reality TV, I can say from my own experience, is horrific. And there's many reasons for that. I think, first of all, one's expectations are boosted to try and make one as enthusiastic as possible on the show. Certainly there were people whispering in my ear when I came out of the show.
Yeah.
There were offers being made, and then I was told I wasn't allowed to accept them. And during these shows, you were given choices, but they're not choices.
Yeah.
You are in you are in an environment that you would be in if you were watching or participating in a stage magic show. And I know about these because years and years ago, one of my students went off to Bristol University and he asked me to go and design some shows for him, which I was very happy to do. And while I was staying there, and he's now quite an important director in America, and while I was staying there, one of his friends came round, and that person was a fellow called Darren Brown. And so he hadn't become famous at the time. He was still a student, but he was trying out his magic tricks and his sort of mind control things. And we did talk about how to stage a show. And I'm not sure how much advice I gave him. But I remember he asked me, choose a card, any card, and I chose a card, and he did some bits and pieces and then said, and is this your card? And I said, I don't remember. And he was very cross with me. And in the same way, he thought that I wasn't susceptible to hypnotism. Whereas there was another person in the room at the time who went out like that. Now, I disagree with him. I think I am susceptible to hypnotism, and I'm certainly susceptible to suggestion. And the circle is a very good example of that, because I really did everything they could have wanted from me. I anticipated a lot of what they were looking for, I think. I think they were very pleased. I think I was cast as the sort of person who, the old person who probably survives for about a week or 10 days and then gets booted out. And I think they were surprised that I threw myself into the show so much and therefore stayed on until the end. I don't think there was any chance I could have won. And I didn't.
Really?
Yeah,
I wasn't. I think it was anticipated I know certainly by myself that you would go for, because I mean everybody in there were certainly characters in their own unique way. You were playing yourself, but you were playing yourself because you were such an interesting person. and you had lots to kind of talk about. And I think other people were catfishes,
Yep.
but it worked. But do you think it was the right idea for you to play yourself? Do you think you did it correctly the
Oh,
way you did?
yes. I was happy playing myself, but when I was approached, they asked me if I would catfish, and they gave me various suggestions. And one of them would, is there a historical or a political figure that you might like to catfish as? And I thought, oh, you want me to pretend to be Nigel Farage? But in fact, I thought I'll pretend to be Mrs. May.
Yeah.
And it was a non-starter because she's just not interesting enough for you to sustain that level of character over more than a few days. So I was quite relieved when they came back to me and they said, you can play yourself. We think you're so surprising, and in fact, if you play yourself, nobody will believe you. and certainly
Yeah.
Woody did wonder whether I was real at one point, and James definitely wondered whether or not I was real.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think,
but there's far more stories than the ones which I told on the show. I could have gone on for hours, and they just thought, oh, it's completely unbelievable, and yeah, it's all true.
I think one thing you said on the show was you were a monk. So
I was.
What was that? What was that like? What kind of
that
was that?
That was very, very comfortable, really. You don't have to think about where your next meal's coming from. People are very quiet.
Yeah.
And it was just very, very ordered, like joining the army, really, without the guns.
Yeah.
And I found it very, very pleasant. They had an idea that I shouldn't go to Oxford, and I slightly fought against that, and in the end I applied without their permission, and they threw me out as a result. So that was our disagreement. But otherwise, I'd be very happy being there even today.
Wow.
It's a nice way to live life, I think.
Yeah.
But I'm also not completely convinced actually today that the church is a terribly respected place or a terribly respected job anymore. It's got its hands very dirty. So
yeah.
Maybe I was lucky.
Yeah. So another thing you were involved.
Would you consider it? Would you consider it?
I think I'd be willing to consider anything, given research, given what if I'd looked into it and it seemed appealing to me, then possibly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a different way of life, really, isn't it?
Yeah. I think if I were to do it again, I'd probably choose sort of one of these completely non-speaking monasteries.
Yeah.
Because the words which people speak, after you've been together with these people for so long, most of the words are completely unimportant anyway. And you can get by without saying things. Cats, anyway, spend most of their time communicating without words, and words possibly. You'll come across this theory in philosophy. Maybe the 20th century is obsessed with the idea of words. But there are people who are suggesting that there was a time before we had verbal communication, and maybe our verbal communication limits us, and maybe there will be a time in the future when we go past verbal communication. So when we look at animals, we're not necessarily doing a sort of Dr. Dolittle type thing and saying, so this squeak means food, this squeak means I want to go to the loo. So if I imitate this, I will be able to communicate. A lot of the communication is simply by looking. And my older cat, the one who's very ill and old, before her mind started to go, she would just stare in my eyes, and it was quite clear what she was saying.
Yeah.
Most of the time, she was complaining about this one here.
That's so powerful, actually. That's quite a deep thing to think about.
Yeah, animals have communication,
Mm,
and they do communicate, but not necessarily
yeah,
verbally. And going from one language to another, how limited verbal communication can be,
yeah.
and how easy it is to misunderstand something.
Must
So words can often be a hindrance, and often I find if you go to another country and you don't speak the language, you're going to understand so much more, because your antenna is so sort of ready to read body language and all these sort of strange age expressions, but actually you pick up
yeah.
so much more. You also feel like an idiot, but that's not necessarily a bad thing.
No. And apart from being a monk, another thing you were part of, and I hope you don't mind going into it. You were a former politician.
Well,
You
I wonder every so often whether or not I ought to go back to that sort of thing.
you
But
left
yeah,
on quite well, on applaudable from my on my behalf.
thank you.
The reasons why you left, I think, were very fair
Well, the
for
reasons
you.
why I joined were very similar,
Mm,
but they would never have had me if I told them I wanted to vet their system.
mm,
I would still describe myself as an extremely wet conservative.
mm.
So I remember I've met Piers Corbyn quite a few times now, and he's quite a fiery, quite a chaotic and sort of eccentric character. And I remember the first time we met, he didn't want to tell me who he was, but I'd actually been drawing him that morning, so I was hardly
Wow.
not likely to recognize him. I'd been drawing a picture of him and his brother,
Mm,
Jeremy, and we talked for about an hour on the train,
mm.
very animatedly, and at the end he said to me, how would you describe the color of your politics? And I said, well, they're probably a little bluer than yours,
Mm.
but I think I'm probably to the left of your brother when it comes to education. And he said, nobody's to the left of Jeremy. I thought, got it.
Yeah.
Because he was saying at the time, which I disapproved of intensely, that some subjects should be given a full grant, and you shouldn't have to pay for them when you go to university. And some subjects you should have to pay for.
Mm.
And I think this is a misunderstanding of education and a misunderstanding of university. It's a sort of education is not utilitarian as such. It can be, in which case you do an apprenticeship. But a university education, which I think probably we're encouraging too many people to do university educations, but a university education is about developing the mind so that you can deal with anything. And certainly in my life, I studied theology, which is practically good for nothing in the 21st century. But
Yeah.
it's that discipline of studying which has allowed me to look at law. It allowed me to help take a case through the European Court of Human Rights and win.
Wow.
It was that sort of discipline that has sort of seen me through years of animation without very much sort of public interest. And I think it's that education which saw me through the Channel 4 show. So it's I've done many different things with that education.
Mm.
I certainly haven't run off. I did my monking before I went to Oxford. So in a way, I've not used that education for its real purpose at all. And teaching in schools, although a lot of the time I have been teaching religious studies and stuff, I much prefer teaching other things. And certainly the first school I taught at, I was asked to teach GCSE subjects. I was asked to teach every GCSE subject except for mine. it was a Hasidic school in North London, and I was the only teacher teaching in English, and I had a smallish group of students in each class, and it was lovely. And I just thought, wow, this is raw material. But on the sciences, I was a bit useless, really. And I remember my first lesson. I had a school inspector in the class.
Oh no!
Yeah, first lesson ever, and I was. the headmaster said, "Why don't you do a lesson of astronomy? The boys would love to do some astronomy." And I think there were two schools. I went from the girls' school to the boys' school, and this was in the boys' school, and so I had this astronomy lesson. And I started off in explaining, how many planets are there in our solar system, and blah, blah, blah. We successfully negotiated whether Pluto was a planet, and I thought, wow, I'm really getting brownie points here. And then there was one boy, and I said, how many planets? So can we agree there's this number of planets that revolve around the sun? And at that, there was a sort of look of complete anxiety around the classroom. And one boy, whose name was Dov, which means lion, and he put up his hand and said, "Sir, the Ramban says that the Earth is the center of the universe, and with respect, I prefer to believe him rather than you, sir." And I thought, my God, can there be people in our society today who have a Ptolemaic view of the universe as opposed to a Galilean view of the universe? And they can.
Yeah.
And how do you work that one out? You just have slightly more complex routes for the planets, which, they're all, there's plenty of books about it, but it's very complicated because it doesn't really work. But you can make it work, and it's just very complicated maths. And I struggled for a few minutes, and there was a lot of umming and ahhing, and the school inspector said to me, "Could I have a word with you, Mr. Wilson?" And we went outside, and he says, "So science isn't your subject, is it?" and it was quite crushing, really. We passed. I don't know how we did.
Wow.
But yeah, that was my first ever lesson in a school, and it was a disaster.
Wow, that sounds very interesting.
Terrifying.
Talking about interesting, you're a very interesting person, I think. You've got lots of different routes of life, avenues that you can.
You must do the same thing. You must do the same thing.
Yeah.
Seize every opportunity? Do you know the film Dead Poets Society with the person who looks like me, Robin Williams, in it?
Yes.
If you don't know that, go and have a look at it. And at one point, he does a rather creepy thing, which I think if he did it today in a British school, he'd get arrested. And he whispers in these children's ears, "Carpe diem," and it's such a good idea. Seize the day, grab the opportunity, and sometimes you're going to grab bad things. Sometimes you're going to grab good things. You can't have the good things without a few bad things. If you want a life of adventure, you have to allow for the possibility that some of your expeditions are going to be disastrous. But without those downs, you don't get the ups.
Exactly.
Seize the day. Seize the day. There we are. Go on. You were.
So with that, would you then be willing to write a book, become an author?
I've started.
You've started. I've got inside information.
I'm up to I think 60,000 words at the moment.
Wow. Yeah.
And I've been writing off to publishers and agents. I'm not getting very far with that. It's really annoying. So if you have a friend who's an agent, do put them on to me, because I need a publisher eventually.
Well, yeah, I'll be the first one to buy that and read that. I'll definitely give that a read.
I'm hoping to do some original things.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that some pages will be comic strip.
Yeah. Because you're obviously you could illustrate your own book. I've seen some of your artwork, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. It's fantastic.
You see, I think we shouldn't be frightened of the We shouldn't be frightened of the popular. And if we wanted to use an academic word, we'd use the word ephemeral. Shall I write that there? The ephemeral. We shouldn't be frightened of the ephemeral, which is stuff you throw away. So the line is, the sweet papers of today are the history of tomorrow.
Yeah.
That's one of my lines, so you can quote it. It's a good line. You never realize how important is the rubbish of today. Because, and if you think back into history, it's the rubbish of yesterday, like the Egyptian mummies, which are the mainstay of our museums, aren't they? It's the stuff you don't think is important. And the stuff you think is important, actually, in the end, it probably isn't. So it's the stuff which we have every day, which is important. And so one reason probably why I was quite happy to go on this television program, because it's popular culture. And in writing an autobiography, and I've written a few novels, but they're not going to go anywhere. But in writing an autobiography, you want to try and avoid sounding too erudite, avoiding sounding too much like a professor. You want to sound like a sort of chum, and so getting that tone right is difficult. And writing in sentences that don't always finish. We don't speak full sentences, you see.
No.
Trying to get that conversational style rather than very academic, and every bit of me wants to put footnotes in. So and I can't do that, so I have to be thinking in terms of quotations, conversations, and half sentences. And I've gone back to my childhood. I've gone back to where I was a child, and then tried to look at that through the prism of television and popular culture. And so how did I get to the point where I was in the circle? But I'm not allowed to say, I'm contractually not allowed to say, to give away too many secrets about the circle, too many secrets about the circle.
I understand.
I've probably been a bit more loose-tongued than I should have been, but I wouldn't recommend it as a career path. Let's say that. I think the actual process of being on a reality TV program is fine, but the aftermath is so horrible. It's not something I would.
Do you think that it was horrible for you?
Yeah. And if it was horrible for me and I won, how horrible would it be for somebody who perhaps said something foolish, and hated on television? There were people even in the circle who had hate mail and death threats.
Yeah, I think there was,
and that's unforgivable. James had death threats.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, and when you look around at what people have done after they've been on these programs, it's not that impressive.
No.
But you can do your own research and see what people do. There are a few people who manage to squeeze into presenting breakfast time or something, but they're few and far between, and those are from a previous generation. Today it seems to be advertising bikinis for ASOS. Well, I'm not likely to do that.
There could be a niche market there. There could be.
I think not. False beards. Anyway, go on. Have I answered that question for you?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
I was scrolling through Twitter, and I was firstly I was just seeing if you had Twitter, and I noticed
I do,
and I'd be definitely giving that a follow after this call. I'll be adding you on there.
Yeah, I think it's called Prof_Tim Wilson, but I don't have a huge following on Twitter. I have a much bigger following on Instagram.
Nor do I.
It's dropping off a bit.
No,
Well,
I
you
don't
need
have
to
a.
have a bigger follower. And
That's
so
what I'm trying to
where
do.
do you intend to do your journalism? Where do you want to be a
So,
journalist?
well, it was actually quite a strange thing. I never wanted to go down that line. I always wanted to
Right.
be. Well, it was actually a politician, really, at first.
Oh my goodness! Now, tell me more. Come on.
So the reason why I wanted to be a politician was because I'd interviewed a politician, a local politician,
Who?
and he's called Scott Benton. He's
Yeah.
a Conservative
Yeah.
MP, and I'd done a bit of research. I'd never heard of him. I'd done a bit of research, and I'd found some things that maybe I didn't agree with, or
Yeah.
or some things that maybe society wouldn't agree with. So I just asked him.
Yeah.
Obviously, you can't do any more than ask. And I'd said about him being on such a high salary as a politician. And I'd asked him about, claiming money and things like that. But then again, he is the MP for such a deprived area of Blackpool South.
Yes.
So I said, do you think it's fair? You obviously being of particular higher wealth than everybody in your constituency. Do you think you can relate to it? And he didn't like that question. He got his back up.
What did you say?
Well, actually, what he did say to me was, he said, "Well, you're only asking me that because I'm a white middle class conservative male." And I thought, well, no, I would have asked the same question about money.
You could ask the same question of Diane Abbott, who lives in a huge house.
Yeah. I would have
and
asked it to anybody.
She's Labour front bench.
Yeah. He'd said to me,
I don't think she's on the front bench anymore.
He said, well, if I was a man from Jamaica, if I was a black man from Jamaica who'd come over, and you'd asked him about his wealth and being representative of a deprived area, you wouldn't ask him. I can guarantee. I said, I'm sorry. I would ask him. I would ask anybody, regardless. If I'm interested in a person, and I've done research into a person, then I will ask them whatever questions.
So in other words, he ducked the question.
Yeah.
He didn't answer your. Yes, exactly. So what he did was to throw glitter in your eyes.
Yes.
So I hope you came back at him.
Oh, I did very much, and I actually came back at him on the call, on Facebook and on Twitter. To which I'm now blocked. I'm now blocked on social media by him, which I think is something that somebody
utterly wrong.
It's extremely unprofessional in my opinion.
You're a schoolboy.
Exactly.
This is wrong. And he's and he presumably is your MP.
I live in the constituency of Blackpool North, and he is Blackpool South.
So he's possibly just about got an angle there, because in principle you shouldn't have been talking to an MP from another constituency. But I have you complained about this to your own MP?
I did. Well, it's actually my MP is also Conservative and shares some similar views of. So it was kind of not getting very far. So I'd asked Sir Lindsay Hoyle.
Yes.
A bit about it.
I know Sir Lindsay Hoyle. He was the first person to speak today in Prime Minister's Question Time.
Yeah. So I'd asked him a bit about it, and he said, as much as I sympathise with you, Connor, professionally I'm not allowed to give my opinion on it. As the Speaker of the House, it's not my duty to talk about the way ministers and politicians conduct themselves on social media. So I thought, but what happened was the local paper picked up on it and wrote a lovely article about it.
You must forward a copy to me. I'd be so delighted to see it.
So it talks a little bit about me, but it mainly talks about his money situations, his financial situations, where he wasn't particularly honest with how much he's earning.
But the issue is, the issue about how much we pay MPs is quite important. It's not only MPs, but also how much we pay people in the House of Lords. And on the one hand, we've got the two hands. If you're in Russia, you can have about 4 hands, by the way. But Russian allows you to do multiple hands. Do you know in Greek mythologies, there's this monster called the Hecaton Heres, which has 100 hands. Anyway, a hand in every pie. But on the one hand, you if you want your people to represent you, you have to pay them enough in order to do a professional job, and you have to attract the sort of people who are going to do that professional job. But on the other hand, they need to reflect the society that they're representing.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to think that maybe we need to be giving them dormitories so they don't have to be running around the place buying second homes in London.
Yes.
Maybe we need to control this in some way, but that has been tried and it's not been very successful.
No.
So I don't know what solutions there are. I know that people who in high office who build themselves large palaces and so on, there's a lot of criticism for them as well. You should hear the backstreet whispering about President Putin, by the way. It's not positive, but he's now put forward a law which says he cannot be prosecuted ever.
Wow. Wow.
so he can now leave high office with impunity.
Wow.
But I mean, he's still going to be looking over his shoulder at assassins because he's a prime target.
Yeah. So kind of.
But you how do we deal with people? How do we pay people who are running our society? It's a really difficult question. And how do we select people who are going to run our society? And maybe the system of voting that we've got needs to be questioned, and the system of party politics needs to be questioned. Maybe the day of party politics is over. And you can look at America, and the American election system is chaotic, and that allows, on the one hand, it allows people like Trump to question it. On the other hand, it actually provides it provides the chaos where no election is really safe. So Hillary Clinton can question it, and then Donald Trump can question it. Whoever loses is going to question that result. And maybe we need to go back to the days when if you lose a political race, you surrender very gracefully. I've always tried to surrender gracefully. It's all I've ever managed to do. I've never won, but I do the most graceful sort of speeches of loss. I think I do the best loss speeches ever.
It's a shame.
I lost one vote by 73 votes, which I thought was very close.
That's very, very.
And it was very close. We had to go through a few recounts.
Yeah.
And the person I was fighting against wasn't even in the constituency at the time.
Wow.
And he'd actually been to Greece, and he came back from Greece in time for the count. And so I did have to go up to him and I say, "Oh, where did you go in Greece? And did you?"
Yeah.
And he wasn't very happy talking to me about that. But by that point, it was over. So, but I thought I might have won.
Yeah. So we've just mentioned US politics, and obviously we mentioned Nigel Farage before, and we
didn't actually get back to Nigel Farage. You were going to ask me a question about Nigel.
It kind of triggered something in my head. It's a video. Nigel Farage was on Good Morning Britain with Piers Morgan a couple of weeks ago with the presidential election. I'm not sure if you saw.
I tend not to watch it, but yeah, go on. What was he saying?
Of Nigel Farage. Piers Morgan had said, "Do you agree with Donald Trump about the suggestion of bleach and disinfectant being injected into a body?" And Nigel Farage sat there and said, "He never said that." And Piers is going, "Well, but he did. He said about bleach is disinfectant. He said inject with disinfectant." And so the Good Morning Britain team, they played the clip twice for him. And Nigel Farage said, no, he didn't say it. Stop with the fake news. Stop. He never said it. And I thought, that kind of,
Extraordinary.
I think that kind of sums him up pretty well.
Yeah. He's Nigel Farage, I mean, I would say, hand on heart, he's probably one of the best speakers in British politics and probably global politics at the moment. However, he's got that position because he's got a very, very limited range. He only speaks about one thing.
Yeah.
And so if you get him off his subject, I would love to have dinner with him. After we finished the circle, there were various requests for me to do political, sort of light political programs, dinner with, what's her name now? She was also, I keep forgetting her name. Can't remember her name. Anyway, she was also on in the Brexit Party, and I thought that would have been rather fun. And I was hoping I might end up with the thing with Nigel Farage, but all that was blocked, so I couldn't do it. And of course, if somebody asked me, would you like to do it? I say, oh, because I'm terrified, because you don't quite know what you're going to get, and you don't know what the conversation is likely to be. But I've always thought there's a big distinction between so a politician's views and that sort of bonhomie that you get by dealing with somebody who's in the same business. And so I've always assumed that over dinner, Nigel Farage and myself would get on very well. We wouldn't see eye to eye over the issues at all. We would see eye to eye over a lot of the causes of the issues. But our solutions are radically different. I mean, I would have been quite happy to have remained in UKIP if I thought I could take it over. But it would have been a different party under my leadership. And because I recognize that Europe is in danger. Now, my solution is different to the solution of Nigel Farage. My solution would have been to remain in Europe and to change Europe from inside. And I think that needs to happen anyway. Europe needs to change. Now, I think even leaving Europe, we still have a duty to sort out the European problem, but we're going to have to do that from outside, and that, therefore from a trading relationship. So it's all the more important that Boris gets a good deal, because otherwise, we're on the back foot. And why are we on the back foot? Why don't we? Why are we in this position? Because of the ghastly Mrs. May. She would have been better off. She would have been better off getting lost in her cornfield when she was going running for a jaunt than coming back to become our prime minister and practice her ABBA dancing. Mrs. May misunderstood almost everything. The first thing she misunderstood was. She clearly modeled herself on Mrs. Thatcher, but you don't model yourself simply on a gender bias. Simply because you're a woman, that's not enough. You have to have a brain as well. Mrs. May's primary objective, I think, was to be liked. And you can see that in her dancing. She actually wants people to tell her that she's doing the dancing well. She was appalling. She wouldn't even get through an audition for Strictly Come Dancing. Not that I've ever seen it, but she was appalling. But you can see that neediness in her. And in contrast, Mrs. Thatcher, who I think was a much more emotional woman, was quite determined not to be liked. Now that of course means that in some cases she was completely hated. But she had a steely indifference to what people thought. And I think if you're going to be prime minister, that is your job. And unfortunately, I think Boris also, like Mrs. May, likes to be liked. And David Cameron, I think, doesn't care. Tony Blair was in his own world anyway, and was quite happy doing his thing. Mr. Major was quite happy doing his thing. I think Mr. Brown wanted to be liked. And I think that probably was his mistake. So really, we've only had a few prime ministers who are worthy of the job, and both of them have been vilified since. Mrs.
Yeah,
Major,
yeah.
Mrs. Thatcher, and Mr. Blair. Mr. Major, I remember living through his tenure. I thought he was appalling, but he's become much better after losing office, and he's become rather a nice older statesman, like Mr. Healy became rather a genial older statesman, and so one of the problems with Brexit, and something I don't understand, is the moment we're into this major constitutional issue, why didn't we start bringing back the great politicians of yesterday from all sides of the house to give advice? And to give to be seen giving their advice and to be seen giving support, but we didn't do that. In fact, other than the Brexit campaign, where we did bring back some of the old people, they've been pushed very much out of the limelight. And that's what the House of Lords should have been. The House of Lords has been cleaned of these people. They've been told to keep quiet, I think. It's disturbing because we stand on the shoulders of the past.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah. So, is there anything that you aspire for the rest of your life? Is there anything that you have goals for?
Yes. I want to make. I would like to make the first animated opera. Wow. I would like to do I would like animation to become a serious art form, which is certainly how Disney anticipated things moving, but instead animation is, oh gosh, the cat's getting locked into me. But instead animation is very much a sort of a thing for children, which is a shame because it's a much more creative medium than just that. Though it does that job perfectly well. I wouldn't mind political office actually, because I think there are times when I'm sitting on the sidelines just think, oh, for God's sake, these are the facts, and you tabulate them, then I can use a tricolon as well as anyone. I say, I came, I saw, I criticized, and you've got to. But I think following the circle and following the COVID and the fact that sort of I found I've not been able to do the sort of things I used to do. I've got to pursue a future in television, and I'd like to do some big musicals. I'd like to do theatre again. I'd like to go back to
very interesting. That'd be very interesting.
There are some parts which are waiting for me.
Yeah.
So most of them are supporting roles in bigger shows, but there are one or two big parts for people with beards. There's Fiddler on the Roof to start with, and that's got the first half of Fiddler on the Roof is really quite good. The second half needs a bit of attention, and you've just got to work out how to do that. And what would you like to do? So you're going to become a journalist? You're going to go to university?
Yes. I'm pretty unsure about whether to stay with politics or to go down, interviewing people, journalism, broadcasting. I've got a few interviews lined up.
Good. Who have you got lined up?
You may or not know who they are, but one man called Peter Blexley. He was on a Channel 4 TV show called Hunted. He was the head hunter on there. He set up. He was the founder of the Undercover Scotland Yard.
Oh right! How brilliant!
In about the 80s or so, 80s, 90s. So he did that. He's quite an advocate for policing, mental health, things like that. So I've got a bit to talk to him about.
Very good.
A gentleman from America who I think he's called Jason Romano, who is an ESPN sports broadcaster.
Right.
And he's kind of he said he's found his calling. So he kind of left ESPN and moved on. He has a podcast. He touches more on religious beliefs now.
How brilliant.
But he'll be quite interesting. So I've got a couple of, I'm trying to get more. I want to do a bit more. I want to.
And are you putting things up on YouTube or something, or are you going to write or what?
Well,
How are you going to deal with these?
So I try and record my calls. Obviously,
Yep.
Everything's virtual nowadays. So I try and record my calls, write up a bit about it. I've got my questions, and then I try and. But for some of them, maybe clip things and put things on YouTube or whatever. Obviously, with that person's consent and what I'm allowed to put up, because obviously there's certain things that I may not be allowed to share. But then do a bit like that. And I saw there's an apprenticeship that the BBC do.
There is indeed. You should
which is a journalist one, and that looks quite. There's a couple of things that you obviously need, like GCSEs and things like that, which I've all got. I've got everything.
But do remember that while you're at your age, all doors are open to you. And those doors start closing very quickly as you go into university. So at this moment now, everything is open. Right to the Prime Minister, he'll write back to you. Right to the Queen. Set your targets right at the top. The Archbishop of Canterbury is quite a good one. Chief Rabbi is another good one. Get to these people, particularly with your background in religion and philosophy, and get them off their subject. Get them speaking about everyday life, and keep your eye on current affairs, which you are doing anyway. So that's great. Do some talks in your school. So push up your CV. Make sure that when it comes to the point when you're doing your UCAS application, you've got a really strong application. And you want to make sure that your personal statement dovetails nicely with whatever your school is going to say about you. And don't do too much extracurricular stuff. So anything you do which is extracurricular, make sure that it sort of fits in with your with the character you're projecting. We all edit ourselves anyway. So so you you see a version of you. It's not you. It's a version of you, and so you have an opportunity to edit the you that other people are going to see, it's not so much about all the things you've done as the potential from the things you've done for the things you might be doing. So it's a sort of tease. So the more you can tease the universities but I would say take a long view and set your goals for the people you want to interview very high. And also look at the list of people who are very old. The Julie Andrews, the Angela Lansburys, these people. They're a sucker for a school person to write to them and say, "Can I interview you?" And
I think that's my like biggest kind of curiosity. It's I'm 16. I'm from Blackpool. I'm actually not from Blackpool. I'm from a little town near like next to Blackpool. And I just live with my brothers and sisters, with my dog, my mum, and we lived just quite small content life. And then I think, but I want to get bigger. How do I do that? So I just like I sent you a message. I was extremely grateful for your reply. I'm delighted. Really appreciate it.
I'm delighted. But if I'm delighted, think of how many other people who are so much more interesting will be delighted. Because and politicians, a bit of soft soap does wonders. because you don't want to get them slamming the door before you've actually got a decent interview out of them. But throwing, if you're brave enough to throw the curved ball and ask them about their wealth, by all means do it. It's a great one. Just draw up your list.
Yeah.
And get onto Zoom. And start talking to people. And I would just get a presence on YouTube.
Yeah.
But certainly start collecting these things and start promoting them at school.
Yeah.
Because the school will be really impressed.
Most definitely.
And ultimately, you forge links with these people. You've then got a list of people that you can invite to the school, and the school will be sort of head over heels with delight at the thought of, you've got Tony Blair coming to deliver a talk. Or Cherry Blair, anyway, who I think Tony Blair is quite inaccessible, but his wife isn't. So do your research and get your list of sort of ideal people, and don't be fobbed off. Lots and lots of letters.
Yeah.
I wrote to my hero when I was 11, and I didn't expect to hear from him. And the next thing I got was an invitation to go down to London and see his studio.
Wow, that's brilliant.
And
that is brilliant.
I was just, I was drooling. It was extraordinary. I wrote to my other hero, and he also wrote back and invited me up to London. And my mother answered the telephone and didn't believe it was him.
Wow. Wow. Brilliant. That is brilliant.
So I never got up for that one. I was really quite upset about that. But she said, "Oh, he's just a little boy." And then told me about it when I came home from school. And I was quite upset, really.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
Yeah. But all of these things are possible. I remember writing to the Queen, the Pope, and I had letters from all of these people. And when I needed that, when I was in Greece and dealing with a campaign against torture, I wrote to everybody in the British Parliament, and everybody didn't reply back. So some of them, have a black mark permanently against their names, as far as I'm concerned. But the most extraordinary range of people did reply.
Yeah.
And I've got letters from Prince Charles, Gordon Brown, Tony Blair, John Major, David Cameron, a wonderful man called Lord Dubbs, who was just so interested. And there was a man who was on EastEnders and then became Michael Cashman, became an MEP, and he was extraordinarily helpful. And these people just pop up, and you just think, "Wow, this is extraordinary! This is amazing."
Yeah.
And they put me in touch with publishers of magazines. And you just think, this is what our society does best.
Yeah. So I'll definitely be looking into to the YouTube and be looking into to rewriting my notes. And I don't have a big following on.
No,
I'll take 30.
You don't need a big following. It's not for the following. It's not to make lots of money. It's to give you the experience. I mean, for example, I'll tell you something I'm doing just by way of encouragement. There's a lady called Karen, and every Tuesday evening she gets me to do a podcast, which generally goes on for about 2 hours.
Yeah.
And for this, she makes me watch an American reality TV show called Survivor. And then we discuss it. Yeah. And I go off at all manner of tangents. And I realize, I get no money for it. It takes up time. So it's not just the time of the program. I've also got to do preparation for it. And I don't really enjoy this show.
Oh no!
I see the hand of production everywhere, and she doesn't. Our views are very different, but actually I enjoy her. I enjoy it. And I feel every time I do it, I'm more and more comfortable in front of the camera.
Yeah.
And the other thing I do is I do news reports for various foreign news channels, particularly in Turkey, and they've got an English speaking channel, and so they call me up and say, can you do a comment on Nagorno-Karabakh or the COVID crisis? And sometimes they get confused. I'm all ready for Nagorno-Karabakh, and they start asking about COVID, and I think this is good for me. But I'm very British, and one of the problems that we have with British English is we say and all the time. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the word in Turkish is incredibly rude.
Oh no. Oh dear.
And I can't stop myself.
Oh no.
So I'm trying very hard to learn how to be slightly less because if you listen to politicians and people who are being interviewed on morning television, they don't and They're so much better than I am.
Yeah.
So I've got to learn. And as I've got to learn, you've got to learn as well. And there's never a point where you stop learning.
No.
So it's back to this thing about what is your education for? Is it utilitarian, or is it just simply the process of learning how to conduct yourself and how to manage thought? And I would say how to conduct yourself, how to manage thought. And if there's some utilitarian value on the way, great. John Stuart Mill will be so happy with you. But in the meantime, just throw yourself into these things because you can. Now, how many GCSEs did you get?
Think about 6 or 7.
Good.
Yeah.
And what grades?
All
is there any you're ashamed of? No. Go
on. Well, I know in myself I could do better. I think it was. I've just passed. This. I was the COVID year. So it was an unfortunate year. But
Gavin Williamson should be strung up.
Yes. But it's nothing that I'm ashamed of, really. I got all 5s and 1 6.
Okay.
Compared to my friends, some got higher, some got lower, but I tend not to compare. I've done that, and it's in the past. It's about what I'm going to achieve next rather than what I previously achieved.
Well, you come across as very confident. I really think you shouldn't put top universities out of your range, out of your sights. Don't put them out. Don't be put off. Consider it, and come back to me if you want some help.
I most definitely will.
If your school wants some help on the religious studies philosophy thing, I'm available. Bar mitzvahs, weddings, baptisms. I can if you want to set up a Zoom link one day.
I'll definitely write to my teacher about it. Yeah.
Because it is my background, and arguments for the existence of God. If that's what you're doing, I can do that with my eyes closed on my head. And the important thing is, it's why are you doing it? Why are you studying this rubbish, really? Because none of it works. Why are you studying this rubbish? You're studying it because it's your first chance to think of abstract thought. That's why you're doing it, because it gives you the language to be able to go on and do other things. Number one. Number two, it should give you a great love for these medievals and people who are very focused on this. Love and respect for people whose opinions you maybe don't necessarily share. And there may come a point where we may find the ontological argument is correct. And there are great mathematicians like Gödel, who's got a version of the mathematical argument. And Gödel is, he's like God himself in terms of mathematics. You can't get anything which is less sort of arty and less and less florid and less sort of foolish. So Gödel is a serious mathematician, and he thought that this was a possibility. And similarly, what's the philosopher Bertrand Russell? You know, this famous story of him walking across the quad in Cambridge, and he comes out of his door and he says, "Great God in boots, the ontological argument is right." And by the time he's crossed the lawn, because he can walk across the lawn, he'd realized it wasn't right. But for that short space of time, you know, if it's a possibility that it might be, that's exciting. So, and that's also why we look at Plato, because not only is Plato beautifully and elegantly written, but there's sort of what if. And Plato raises so many interesting questions. For example, in the Parmenides, Socrates and Parmenides never met. They couldn't have met. They were the wrong generations. But Parmenides is a much older philosopher. And in the Parmenides says, is there a perfect bad? In fact, the word he uses in Greek is skata, which is shit. And I just think it's just so beautifully expressed. Could you have a perfect bad? Christianity says, of course, you can. It's called the devil. But even then it qualifies and says, well, he's not quite eternal. So he's not a perfect bad. A perfect bad would be bad from the beginning to the end, or without beginning or end. And then you've also got questions in Plato about the nature of eternity. Can you have eternity that begins at a particular point? Yes, it's still eternal. It's still infinite. So there are ranges of infinity. And then you go back into mathematics. And you can't ask these questions without realizing people have asked these questions before. And when people have asked these questions, if you go back, you advance back into the 4th century BC, and then you can go forward. And that's why we do it. And I think it's thrilling. Not least of all because it's in other languages. And Thomas Aquinas is such an interesting man as well. He was terribly fat, so fat that the other friars in his friary had to carve a semicircle in the dining room table so that he could join them comfortably for meals. Apparently,
wow.
This may be an apocryphal story, but I've been happily churning that one out for years.
Wow.
Anyway, off you go. And thank you very much for being.
I really appreciate your time. I really do. Thank you very so much.
Me too. So get back to me and let me know if there's anything further I can do. But
I'll definitely keep in touch.
I like the way you do your interviews. You make me feel very comfortable. And I probably said outrageously sort of open things that I shouldn't have said. But go through it, as long as I've not been overcritical of things, but I could have been, of course.
No, I'll definitely keep in touch. And hopefully one day we'll have another Zoom call again.
I look forward to that.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
I'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Have fun.